Now we're going to follow up from our earlier discussion and we're going to directly address the issue of polygamy. And so hopefully, as with Savan, when we break this down, it will forever be broke. We're going to address a couple of passages in scripture to address this topic and this idea that some people have about polygamy, that it is not only something that they believe is condoned in scripture, but something that is revered in scripture. And so we're going to do a little bit of an exegesis with a focus on the discussion in scripture, this prophetic discussion about 7 women grabbing onto one man. What is that all about? And so you have different people reading that one scripture and coming away with all sorts of things, or perhaps what's going on is eisegesis. And so people are not necessarily coming away with something, they are actually putting something into the scripture. And so we're going to look at it and the psychology that's under what's going on with this dynamic of using this scripture to glorify, so to speak, polygamy. Now, interestingly, this scripture that refers to these 7 women laying hold of one man, it actually relates to war, it relates to battle. But some people, in discussing this, sort of skip over the foundation for that entire dynamic. And so we're going to address the foundation. And so first we're going to start off with addressing the word polygamy. What is polygamy all about? Polygamy is about, of course, having more than one spouse. And there is a decided focus for some individuals on polygyny. And polygyny, of course, with that GYN at the end there, is about a man having more than one wife. So specifically talking about having multiple GYN. And so also related to zoology with male animals having more than one female. And so again, I'm going to point out that given the state of the world, fantasizing about, waiting for, obsessing about this day when 7 women take hold of one man, that might be some misplaced attention. Because again, there are some more foundational issues that people might want to focus on, such as adequate food, water, shelter, clothing, and protection of children and elderly. But I digress. Let's move on. And so you see many people using this scripture about the day that 7 women shall take hold of one man, coming out of Isaiah to justify this idea or this practice of polygamy. And so what you see in Isaiah 4 is, and in that day 7 women shall take hold of one man. The question is, what that day are we talking about? When you look at the totality of it, it really seems like that day is something that has already come and gone. And so that day does not really sound like it's in the 21st century. If you do your own exegesis, you will see that. But we're going to continue on with the understanding that you really have to combine Isaiah 3 and 4 to get an understanding of that day. And so while many individuals focus on the 7 women and the acquisition of these 7 women, there needs to be a greater focus on that day. What happens leading up to this day? So what exactly is going on in that day? In order to understand that day, you have to go back to Isaiah 3 in order to get a full picture of what has taken place prior to 7 women desperately grabbing onto one man. And so what you have are a number of individuals who are fantasizing about that day. What are they fantasizing about? If they've read the scripture and they've done the exegesis, they know that they are getting excited about something that has, again, probably taken place in the past, given the narrative of Jerusalem is ruined and Judah is fallen. And so, what they are fantasizing about, what they are glorying about, is the day in which their nation is destroyed. All of their warriors are destroyed. The young people are destroyed. Their families have fallen in battle. That's what's going on here in this particular that day. And so you see here at Isaiah 3:8, for Jerusalem is ruined and Judah is fallen. So this is destruction. And then it gets very specific about why they are ruined and why they are fallen, because their tongue and their doings are against the Lord to provoke the eyes of his glory. There's a lot, going on in Isaiah 3 and 4 that tie into this whole dynamic of ruin and fallen. And none of it is good, by the way. But if you've read that, you already know that. And so you also know that there's nothing to be glorying in terms of that day of desperation where you have 7 women latching on to one man who is still standing. We're going to keep this first part succinct so that everyone understands this very small, important part of the dynamic. And so in this dynamic, that day, we are talking about that day in which Jerusalem is ruined and Judah is fallen. And so the most important part is not that someone gets to have 7 women grabbing them. The operative dynamic is that Judah has fallen and Jerusalem is ruined. And so we are talking about a time, that day, where people are essentially existing among the ruins. And what is happening is this sense of desperation in order to survive and continue on in the face of all of this destruction and ruin. So again, the most important thing is not having 7 women out of desperation clinging on to one man. And as we wrap this exegesis up, there is something here that requires attention with respect to whether this is some sort of reward or not. So we already know we're talking about destruction and a fallen nation. But what we also see here is this is not likely some sort of reward based upon the second part of this, where it indicates that their tongues and their doings were against the Lord. And so this was provoking the eyes of his glory. And so this 7 women for this one man, this is not something to be looking forward to. This is not something that women should be thinking about. This is their ultimate place as some reward for some man. And no man should be thinking that this is some prize that he gets at the end of some rainbow, like this is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Because when you look at the totality of this scripture and this narrative and this prophecy against Judah, this prophecy against Jacob, you can see that prior to this desperation is this destruction. We're going to wrap up this very discreet exegesis anticipating that we will continue on with getting a better understanding of why, with respect to this entire dynamic that's leading into Isaiah 4 from Isaiah 3. Remember, knowledge is power.